Have you ever told yourself that you were fine, even when you knew something was not right? Have you ever looked at a number on a medical report and quietly decided it was not serious enough to change your life? Have you ever thought, I still feel strong, I still go to work, I'm not that old? I used to think that way. For 5 years, I lived with high blood pressure, and for 5 years, I ignored it. Not because I didn't know, but because I didn't want to know what it meant. I was 46 when my doctor first mentioned it. He said it casually, almost gently. Your blood pressure is a little high. A little high. Those words felt small, harmless. He suggested I reduce salt, exercise more, come back in 3 months. I nodded. I promised. I left the clinic thinking about emails I had to send. At that time, my life looked stable. I lived in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. Every morning, I drove 40 minutes to the office. I worked in middle management at a logistics company, not the boss, not the new guy, just somewhere in the middle, old enough to feel tired, young enough to feel responsible for everything. I had a wife, 2 teenage kids, a mortgage, car payments, college savings accounts, health insurance, life insurance, responsibilities stacked neatly on top of each other like files on my desk. There was always something more urgent than my blood pressure. 3 months later, I did not return to the clinic. 6 months later, I told myself I would schedule it soon. 1 year later, I forgot what the original number even was. Sometimes at the pharmacy, I would see those free blood pressure machines near the entrance. I would look at them, and then I would walk past. I did not want to sit down and see the truth printed on a small piece of paper. At home, my wife sometimes mentioned it. You should check your pressure again. I will, but I never did. I told myself I was just stressed. Work was demanding. The company was restructuring. Younger employees were faster with technology. Older employees were competing to stay relevant. I felt like I had to prove myself every day. Stress became normal. Fast food became convenient. Sleep became optional. Exercise became something I talked about but did not do. I drank 2 cups of coffee before 9 a.m. I answered emails during lunch. I drove home in silence, exhausted but restless. After dinner, I sat on the couch and scrolled through my phone. News, politics, stock market updates, more stress, more noise, more reasons to feel tense. Sometimes I felt a slight headache behind my eyes. Sometimes I felt my heart beating hard when I climbed the stairs. Sometimes, late at night, I could hear my pulse in my ears when the house was quiet, but I told myself it was normal. I was not young anymore. This is what middle age feels like, right? At 48, and during a required company physical, the nurse wrapped the cuff around my arm. The machine tightened. I watched the numbers rise. She frowned, just slightly. Let's try that again. The second reading was higher. She did not smile this time. You should really follow up with your doctor. I laughed softly. Yes, I've been meaning to. Meaning to. Those 2 words carried 5 years of delay. The truth is, I was afraid, not of dying. That felt too dramatic. I was afraid of changing. If I admitted the problem was serious, I would have to eat differently, move differently, slow down, say no to things. And I did not know how to say no. In America, especially for men my age, being busy is a badge of honor. Being tired means you are working hard. Skipping lunch means you are dedicated. Ignoring pain means you are strong. At least, that is what we tell ourselves. My father had high blood pressure too. He took pills, he complained about them, but he never talked about feelings. He never talked about fear. He worked until he couldn't. Then he retired quietly, Then, a few years later, he had a mild stroke. He survived, but he was never quite the same. I remember visiting him in the hospital. I remember thinking, I should take better care of myself. And then I returned to my life. 5 years passed like that, quietly, without drama, without warning signs that felt urgent enough, until one morning. It was a Tuesday. Cold, February wind against the windows. I woke up before the alarm. That was unusual. My head felt heavy, not painful, just heavy. I sat up slowly. The room tilted, just slightly. I waited. Maybe I stood up too fast. I placed my feet on the floor. The dizziness did not disappear. Instead, it deepened, like the ground was not stable. I walked toward the bathroom. Each step felt uncertain. My heart was beating harder than normal, not fast, but strong, too strong. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked pale, older than I remembered. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was dehydrated. Maybe I did not sleep well. Maybe it was nothing. I turned on the shower. The sound of water filled the room, and then something changed. My vision blurred for a second, just 1 second. But in that second, fear entered my body. Real fear. The kind that does not ask permission. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub. My hands were cold. My breathing was shallow. I could hear my heart in my ears again, louder this time. I thought about my father. I thought about that hospital room. I thought about the word stroke. For the first time in 5 years, I did not say, it's nothing. For the first time, I said, what if it's something? My wife knocked on the door. Are you okay? I hesitated. That small moment of pride tried to speak. I'm fine. But the word did not come out. Instead, I said, I don't feel right. Saying that sentence felt heavier than any diagnosis. I don't feel right. It was the first honest thing I had said about my health in years. She drove me to urgent care. I did not argue. I did not delay. I did not check my emails. I just sat in the passenger seat and stared at the winter trees passing by. In the waiting room, everything felt quiet. Too quiet. A television was playing the news, but I could not hear it. My thoughts were louder. Why did I wait? Why did I ignore it? Why did I believe I was different? When the nurse called my name, I stood up slowly. The blood pressure cuff wrapped around my arm again, tight, mechanical, unemotional. The machine beeped. She looked at the screen. Then she looked at me. This time, there was no softness in her expression. Your blood pressure is very high. Very high. Not a little high. Not slightly elevated. Very high. In that moment, 5 years of excuses collapsed. 5 years of, I'm busy. 5 years of, I'll start next week. 5 years of pretending numbers did not matter. The doctor came in shortly after. He spoke calmly, but his words were clear. You're lucky you came in today. Lucky. That word stayed with me. Lucky that the dizziness did not turn into something worse. Lucky that my body gave me a warning instead of a consequence. As I sat there, listening, I realized something simple and uncomfortable. High blood pressure had never been silent. I had just refused to listen. That Tuesday morning did not end my life. It did not become a dramatic hospital story, but it became a dividing line. Before that morning, I believed I had time. After that morning, I understood that time does not negotiate. If you are listening right now, if you are in your 40s or 50s, if you have seen a number on a screen and told yourself it was not that bad, I want you to pause. In just for a moment, ask yourself gently, what have you been ignoring? And what will it take for you to stop? I did not go home from urgent care with dramatic instructions. There were no flashing lights, no ambulance, no hospital bed. Instead, there was something quieter, a prescription, a printed sheet of recommendations, and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the next week. It almost felt ordinary. And that frightened me more than anything, because ordinary is easy to ignore. Again, the doctor explained that my blood pressure reading was dangerously high, not high enough for immediate hospitalization, but high enough to cause real damage if I continued living the way I was living. He used simple words: "Your heart is working too hard." That sentence stayed with me. My heart is working too hard. I imagined it like a small engine running all day without rest. No oil change, no maintenance, just constant pressure. He asked about my lifestyle. I answered honestly for the first time. Yes, I ate fast food at least 3 times a week. Yes, I added salt without tasting first. No, I did not exercise regularly. Yes, I felt stressed most days. No, I did not sleep enough. Saying it out loud felt uncomfortable, like reading a list of small betrayals. He did not judge me. He simply nodded. Then he said something I did not expect. "This is common, especially for men your age." Common. I was not unique. I was not unlucky. I was typical, and somehow that made it more real. On the drive home, my wife kept glancing at me, not in panic, but in quiet concern. We had been married for over 20 years. We had faced financial stress, teenage arguments, job uncertainty. But health fear feels different. It is invisible and deeply personal. When we arrived home, the house was empty. The kids were at school. The silence felt heavy. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten rushed breakfasts, answered emails, signed school permission slips, paid bills. Now it felt like a place of decision. My wife placed the prescription on the table. "Are you going to take it?" I looked at the paper, a small pill, once a day. It seemed simple, but to me, it felt like a label, a reminder that I was no longer fine. I nodded slowly. Yes. And this time, I meant it. The first pill did not feel dramatic, no immediate change, no sudden calm, just a small action. But that night, when I lay in bed, I felt something new. Awareness. I could feel my heartbeat again, not louder, just present. And instead of ignoring it, I listened. Over the next few days, I paid attention in ways I never had before. I noticed how tense my shoulders were while driving. I noticed how quickly I reacted to work emails. I noticed how I ate without thinking, standing at the counter, scrolling on my phone, barely tasting anything. Food was fuel. Stress was normal. Rest was optional. That had been my formula. At my follow-up appointment, my regular doctor reviewed the urgent care report. He looked at my previous records, 5 years of elevated numbers, 5 years of monitor and adjust lifestyle, 5 years of no real change. He did not scold me, but he did ask one question. "Why didn't you take it seriously before?" I opened my mouth, and then I closed it, because the honest answer sounded weak. I was busy. Busy protecting a job that would replace me in 2 weeks if I disappeared. Busy earning money to support a family that needed me alive more than employed. Busy proving I was strong by pretending I was not vulnerable. "I thought I had time," I finally said. He nodded. "That's what most people think." He explained what high blood pressure actually does, how it quietly damages blood vessels, how it increases the risk of stroke, heart attack, kidney problems, how it rarely causes obvious symptoms until something serious happens. It's called the silent killer for a reason. Silent, yes. but only if you refuse to listen. That afternoon, I stopped by a pharmacy and bought a home blood pressure monitor. I had walked past them for years. Now I placed one in my shopping cart. It felt symbolic, like I was choosing awareness over avoidance. The first time I used it at home, my hands were slightly shaky. I wrapped the cuff around my arm, pressed the button, waited. The numbers appeared, still high, lower than urgent care, but not normal, not safe. Seeing it in my own kitchen made it undeniable. This was not a temporary episode, it was a pattern. That evening, my son asked casually, "Dad, are you okay?" Teenagers rarely ask direct questions, so when they do, it matters. "I'm working on getting healthier," I said. He nodded. "Cool. Simple." But in that simple word, I heard something else. Relief. Maybe he had noticed my tiredness, my irritability, my short temper. Children observe more than we think. The next morning, instead of scrolling on my phone before work, I sat quietly for 5 minutes. No meditation app, no dramatic ritual, just silence. I realized how uncomfortable silence felt. My mind wanted stimulation, noise, information, distraction. Stillness forced me to face something I had avoided. I was exhausted, not just physically, emotionally, mentally. 5 years of pressure had not only strained my heart, it had strained my spirit. Changing habits at 48 feels different than at 28. There is more resistance, more routine, more excuses, but there is also more clarity. You understand consequences differently. You know your body will not reset itself magically. I did not transform overnight. I did not throw away every unhealthy item in the kitchen. I did not wake up at 5 a.m. to run 5 miles. Instead, I started small. I stopped adding salt automatically. I parked farther from the office entrance. I drank one less cup of coffee. Small adjustments, but intentional. At work, I began noticing how often I held my breath during meetings, how my jaw tightened when someone disagreed with me, how I rushed through lunch to appear efficient. Efficiency had become my identity, but efficiency without health is fragile. One afternoon, I declined a late meeting request. "I have a personal commitment," I wrote. The commitment was a 20-minute walk around my neighborhood. When I hit send, I felt nervous. Would they think I was less dedicated, replaceable, weak? But no one responded negatively. The meeting was rescheduled. The world did not collapse. For the first time, I realized something important. The pressure I felt was not only external, much of it was self-created. Each night I recorded my blood pressure in a small notebook. Date, time, on numbers. At first, the numbers barely changed. That frustrated me. I wanted quick proof, immediate reward. But health does not respond to impatience. It responds to consistency. Some evenings, I still felt the familiar headache, but now, instead of ignoring it, I paused, drank water, turned off the television, went to bed earlier. I began treating discomfort as information instead of inconvenience. One weekend, my wife and I walked through a local park. It was cold, but sunny. I realized I had not taken a relaxed walk in years, not to get somewhere, not to burn calories, just to move. My breathing felt deep, steady. For a moment, I felt grateful. Grateful that my body had warned me instead of failing me. The truth is, high blood pressure did not appear in one dramatic moment. It built slowly, through skipped checkups, through processed meals, through chronic stress, through silence, and reversing it would also be slow, intentional, uncomfortable at times, but something had shifted inside me. The fear from that Tuesday morning had transformed into something quieter. responsibility, not fear of death, but respect for life, for the years I still want to see, for the graduations, the future grandchildren, the quiet evenings with my wife. I used to believe strength meant pushing through. Now I am beginning to understand that strength might mean something else: listening, adjusting, admitting limits, choosing long-term well-being over short-term pride. If you are in your 40s or 50s, if you have built a life around responsibility, if you believe everyone depends on you, let me tell you something I am still learning. They depend on you being alive, not just productive, not just busy, alive and present. My blood pressure did not become normal in a week. It did not magically disappear. But for the first time in 5 years, I am no longer pretending it does not exist. And that might be the most important change of all. The third week after that Tuesday morning felt different. Not dramatic, not heroic, just honest. The first wave of fear had passed. The urgency had softened. And what remained was something more difficult than panic: consistency. It is easy to change for 3 days. It is easy to promise a new life when you are scared. But it is much harder to stay committed when nothing feels urgent anymore. When you wake up and feel almost normal again, when work emails pile up, when the old habits quietly whisper, "One time won't matter," I began to understand that my real battle was not against high blood pressure. It was against my own patterns, patterns built over decades. Wake up, rush, react, eat fast, work late, ignore fatigue, repeat. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself in the drive-through lane of a fast food restaurant. I had not planned to be there. It just happened. Muscle memory, convenience, exhaustion. The glowing menu board looked familiar, comforting, easy. For a moment, I felt almost angry. Angry that something so simple, food, now felt complicated. Angry that I had to think about sodium and calories and long-term consequences. The old version of me would have ordered without hesitation. But that night, I drove away. Not because I'm strong, but because I was aware. And awareness changes things. At home, I prepared something simple: grilled chicken, vegetables, brown rice, nothing exciting. But as I sat at the table chewing slowly, I realized something surprising. The food tasted better when I was not rushing, when I was not scrolling, when I was not answering messages. For years, I had eaten like I was refueling a machine. Now I was eating like a human being. My blood pressure readings began to shift slightly, not dramatically, but enough to notice. A few points lower, then a few more. The numbers still were not perfect, but they were moving. And that movement gave me hope. Hope is powerful, but it can also be fragile, because there were days when the numbers went back up, days when work stress spiked, days when I slept poorly. On those mornings, I felt discouraged. Maybe it's too late. Maybe the damage is already done. But my doctor had told me something important at my last visit. "This is a long conversation with your body," he said. "Not a short argument." I like that image. A conversation, not a fight, not a punishment, a dialogue. If my blood pressure was high, maybe my body was speaking. And instead of silencing it, I needed to respond. At work, I began experimenting with small boundaries. I stopped checking email after 9 p.m. The first night felt strange, almost irresponsible, like I was neglecting something important. But nothing catastrophic happened. No crisis, no angry calls, just quiet. That quiet made me realize how much constant stimulation had shaped my nervous system. My body had been living in a state of low-level emergency for years. No wonder my heart was working too hard. I also started walking during lunch, not every day, but most days. 15 minutes, sometimes 20, around the office park, past the same buildings I had rushed between for years. I noticed things I had never seen. Trees planted near the parking lot, a small pond behind one of the warehouses, the way sunlight reflected off windows. These details had always been there. I had just been moving too fast to see them. One afternoon, a younger coworker joined me. "Trying to get steps in?" he asked. "Trying to stay alive," I replied with a small smile. He laughed, but I wasn't joking. As the weeks passed, I noticed changes beyond the numbers. My temper softened. I did not react as quickly in meetings. When someone criticized a proposal, I felt less defensive, less threatened. It was as if lowering physical pressure slowly reduced emotional pressure too. I had never connected those things before, but now I wondered how deeply they were linked. My wife noticed it first. "You seem calmer," she said one night. I thought about that. Calmer, not happier, not more successful, just calmer. And maybe that was enough. There were still difficult days. One Friday, a major client threatened to pull their contract. The entire office was tense. Old patterns returned quickly. My chest felt tight. My jaw clenched. That evening, when I checked my blood pressure, it was higher again. Not as high as before, but elevated. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt informed. Stress had a direct effect. This was not theoretical anymore. It was measurable, visible, real. That night, instead of staying up late replaying the situation in my mind, I did something new. I turned off the lights earlier than usual. I lay in bed, and I focused on slow breathing. Inhale, exhale. No phone, no television, just breath. It felt almost uncomfortable at first, but gradually my heart rate slowed. My thoughts softened. I fell asleep faster than I had in years. The next morning, my reading was lower again. Not perfect, but stable. It felt like proof that my choices mattered, that my body responded when I treated it with respect. One Sunday afternoon, I visited my father. He sat in his living room, watching a baseball game. His movements were slower than they used to be. His speech slightly delayed from the stroke years ago. We talked about ordinary things, weather, politics, the rising cost of groceries. Before I left, he looked at me carefully. "You look thinner," he said. "Trying to be smarter," I answered. He nodded slowly. Wish I had done that earlier. There was no bitterness in his voice, just reflection. I drove home thinking about timing, about how many warnings we receive before consequences arrive, and how often we ignore them because they are quiet. High blood pressure had never shouted at me. It had whispered, through headaches, through fatigue, through numbers on a screen. And I had chosen noise over listening. And now, in these slower weeks, I am learning something unexpected. Health is not just about food or medication. It is about attention. About noticing tension before it becomes damage, about recognizing when you're pushing too hard, about understanding that productivity is not the same as purpose. I still take my medication every morning. I still check my blood pressure regularly. I still have stressful days, but I no longer pretend that stress is a badge of honor. I no longer believe that ignoring discomfort makes me strong. If anything, it makes me fragile. There is something humbling about accepting that your body has limits. At 48, I cannot live like I am 28. And maybe that is not a loss. Maybe it is wisdom. Sometimes I think back to that Tuesday morning in February. The dizziness, the blurred vision, the fear. It would have been easy to call it bad luck, but now I see it differently. It was not an interruption, it was an invitation to change direction before the road ended. If you are listening tonight, if you feel tired but keep telling yourself it is normal, if you see numbers creeping higher but believe you can deal with them later, I understand that voice inside you. I lived with it for 5 years. But I also know this: later is not guaranteed, and strength is not measured by how long you can ignore a problem. It is measured by how honestly you face it. My blood pressure is still a work in progress. So am I. But for the first time in a long time, my heart is not just working hard, it is being heard. By the fourth month, something unexpected happened. High blood pressure stopped being the center of my fear and started becoming the center of my discipline. The panic from that Tuesday morning had faded. The urgency had matured into routine, and routine, I discovered, is where real change lives. Every morning, before coffee, before emails, before the world entered my mind, I wrapped the cuff around my arm, pressed the button, waited. The machine hummed softly. Numbers appeared. Some mornings were good, some were frustrating, but none were ignored. That was new. For 5 years, I avoided numbers. Now I face them daily, not with anger, not with denial, just with acceptance. I began to notice patterns. If I slept less than 6 hours, my readings were higher. If I had a stressful meeting late at night, the next morning reflected it. If I walked in the evening, even slowly, the numbers improved. My body was no longer mysterious. It was responsive, logical, honest. There is something grounding about data when you stop fearing it. Instead of feeling judged, I felt informed. The numbers were not criticizing me, they were communicating. One afternoon during a routine follow-up, my doctor looked at my recent log. He nodded slowly. This is progress. Two simple words, but they meant more than any promotion I had received in years. Progress, not perfection, not cured. Progress. He adjusted my medication slightly, encouraged me to continue what I was doing, and then he said something that stayed with me. If you keep this up, you may be able to reduce medication in the future. Reduce, not eliminate, not magically erase the past, but reduce. And that possibility felt powerful. Driving home, I realized something subtle but important. For years, I treated my body like an employee, demanding, expecting performance, ignoring complaints. Now I was beginning to treat it like a partner, listening, responding, collaborating. At work, the changes continued quietly. I started scheduling short breaks between long meetings, 5 minutes to stand, stretch, breathe. At first, it felt unnecessary, but I noticed that when I paused intentionally, I spoke more clearly. I reacted less emotionally. My mind felt steadier. It surprised me how much tension I used to carry without awareness. One day, during a particularly intense negotiation, I felt that old familiar pressure rising, my heart beating harder, my chest tightening. But instead of pushing through blindly, I slowed my speech, lowered my voice, took one deeper breath before responding. No one else noticed, but inside, everything shifted. Control returned, not over the situation, but over myself. That evening, my blood pressure reading was stable, not perfect, but steady. It felt like confirmation that emotional regulation and physical health are deeply connected. We separate them in conversation, but the body does not. At home, dinner looked different now. Less processed food, more vegetables, more water. Fewer late-night snacks, not extreme, not restrictive, just intentional. My wife began experimenting with new recipes. My daughter teased me about reading nutrition labels. My son asked if walking together would help his basketball endurance. Health, once private and silent, had become part of our shared conversation, and that felt meaningful. One Saturday morning, I woke up before everyone else. The house was quiet, sunlight just beginning to touch the windows. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and instead of checking my phone, I simply sat, breathing slowly, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing outside. It struck me how rare this stillness had been in my life. For years, I filled every empty space with noise, as if silence was something to escape. Now, silence felt restorative, like giving my nervous system permission to rest. My readings that week were consistently lower than they had been in years, still slightly elevated, but controlled, managed. The doctor called it well regulated. I called it earned. But the most important shift was not on the monitor. It was internal. I no longer saw myself as invincible, and strangely, that made me stronger. Because pretending to be invincible is exhausting. Admitting limits is freeing. There were still hard days, deadlines, unexpected expenses, news headlines that stirred anxiety. But instead of absorbing stress automatically, I began questioning it. Is this within my control? Is this worth the physical cost? Does reacting intensely improve anything? Often the honest answer was no. And when the answer was no, I practiced letting go. Not perfectly, but intentionally. One evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror again, the same mirror from that February morning. My face looked different, not younger, not dramatically thinner, but softer, less tense. There were still lines around my eyes, still gray in my hair, but there was also awareness, a quiet steadiness I had not seen before. That Tuesday morning had frightened me, but it had also interrupted a dangerous illusion. The illusion that health will wait for convenience. The illusion that responsibility to others excuses neglect of self. The illusion that strength means silence. Now, I understand something I wish I had learned earlier. The body keeps score. It remembers every late night, every stressful reaction, every meal eaten without thought, but it also remembers every walk, every deep breath, every moment of rest, every choice to listen instead of ignore. Last week, during another checkup, my doctor smiled slightly. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. That sentence felt simple, but it represented months of quiet effort, months of saying no to old habits, months of choosing awareness over avoidance, months of small, repetitive decisions. If you are in your 40s or 50s, if you carry responsibilities on your shoulders every day, if you believe you must endure everything silently, I want you to consider something gently. Your body is not an obstacle to your goals, it is the foundation of them. Without it, everything else becomes fragile. I used to think I did not have time to care for my health. Now I realize I did not have time not to. That Tuesday morning changed everything. Not because it was dramatic, but because it forced honesty. And honesty, once accepted, does not disappear easily. My blood pressure may never be perfect. Life may never be stress-free. But I'm no longer ignoring the signals. I'm no longer pretending numbers are suggestions. I'm no longer sacrificing long-term presence for short-term pride. For the first time in years, I feel something steady inside my chest. Not pressure, not fear, just rhythm. And that rhythm feels like a second chance. There is something about the fifth month that feels less dramatic, less emotional, less urgent, and more real. By now, the story is no longer about a frightening morning in February. It is about ordinary days, ordinary choices, ordinary discipline. And ordinary discipline is what quietly shapes a life. When people hear a health story, they often expect a big ending, a miracle number, a moment where everything becomes perfect. But that is not how this unfolded. There was no single morning when the machine displayed a flawless reading and I felt victorious. Instead, there were gradual improvements, small drops, stability, consistency, and that consistency became my victory. One evening, I opened the small notebook where I had been recording my blood pressure for months, page after page of dates and numbers. At first, the numbers were high and uneven. Then slowly, they began to settle, not dramatically, but noticeably. The visual pattern told a story of attention, of commitment, of not giving up when progress felt slow. Looking at those pages, I realized something important. Change is rarely visible day to day, but over time, it becomes undeniable. My doctor eventually reduced my medication slightly, just a small adjustment, but it felt symbolic, not because I wanted to escape medication, but because it represented partnership, my effort, the medicine's support, my body's response, working together. At work, something else had shifted. I no longer introduced myself through exhaustion. When someone asked, "How are you?" I stopped answering, "Busy." Instead, I sometimes said, "Good." And I meant it. Busy had once been my identity. Now balance felt more important. I started leaving the office at a reasonable hour most days. The first few times felt strange, almost rebellious. But over time, it became normal. I ate dinner without rushing. I listened more carefully when my daughter talked about school. I watched a full basketball game with my son without checking email during every break. Presence felt richer than productivity ever did. One quiet Sunday afternoon, my wife and I sat on the back porch. The air was mild, birds moving between trees, no television, no urgent tasks. She looked at me and said something simple. "I'm glad you went to urgent care that day." I nodded. "So am I." There was a pause. Then she added, "I was scared." I had never asked her how she felt that morning. I had been too focused on my own fear. Hearing her say that reminded me of something I had overlooked. My health is not only mine. It belongs in some way to the people who love me. When I ignore it, they carry silent worry. When I care for it, they breathe easier too. A few weeks later, I visited my father again. He moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp. We talked about ordinary things. Then he asked, "How's your pressure?" It surprised me. He had never asked that directly before. "Better," I said. He nodded. "Good. Don't wait for something worse." I understood what he meant. He had lived that lesson already. I did not need to repeat it. There are still mornings when my reading is slightly elevated. Stressful days still happen. Deadlines still exist. The world is not calmer. Life is not simpler. But I am different inside it. When I feel tension rising, I notice it sooner. When I feel fatigue, I respect it faster. When I see a number creeping upward, I adjust instead of deny. Our awareness has replaced avoidance, and that shift feels permanent. If I could speak to the version of myself from 5 years ago, sitting in that clinic, hearing a little high for the first time, I would not lecture him. I would not scare him with statistics. I would simply say this: listen. Listen before your body has to shout. Listen before fear becomes your teacher. Listen while the signal is still gentle. High blood pressure is often called the silent killer. But silence does not mean absence. It means subtle. It means gradual. It means easy to overlook in a busy life, especially in middle age, especially in America, where speed is admired and rest feels optional. But speed has a cost, and rest is not weakness. It is repair. I used to measure success through salary increases, through titles, through how indispensable I appeared at work. Now I measure success differently, through stability, through calm reactions, through numbers that reflect care rather than neglect, through evenings where my heart beats steadily while I sit quietly with my family. That Tuesday morning changed everything. Not because I almost died, but because I almost continued living the wrong way. The dizziness was temporary. The lesson was lasting. Today, when I wrap the cuff around my arm, I no longer feel fear. I feel responsibility. I press the button, wait for the numbers, accept what they show, and adjust if necessary. There is no drama in it anymore. Only discipline, only respect. If you are listening right now, if you are in your 40s or 50s, if you have built a life that depends on you, pause for a moment, not in panic, not in guilt, just in honesty. When was the last time you truly listened to your body? When was the last time you chose long-term presence over short-term pressure? When was the last time you treated your health as non-negotiable? You do not need a frightening morning to begin. You do not need dizziness or blurred vision or a nurse saying, very high. You can begin quietly, today, with one appointment, one walk, one earlier bedtime, one honest look at a number you have been avoiding. I ignored my high blood pressure for 5 years. I told myself I had time. I told myself I was strong. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. But I was also lucky. Lucky that my body gave me a warning. Lucky that I listened before it was too late. Lucky that change was still possible. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it made you think, even for a moment, about your own health, then it has done its job. Take care of your heart, not just emotionally, but physically. Protect the rhythm that carries you through every conversation, every responsibility, every ordinary day. Because strength is not how long you can ignore a problem. It is how gently and consistently you choose to face it. And your future deserves that strength.